Friends, we ask you to please take your seats at this time. I'd like to remind everyone to please make sure that your cell phones and pages are please turned off. Thank you.
Please be seated. The psalmist says, "The Lord is close to the brokenhearted. Please, God of comfort, be close to all of us in our time of brokenness. May you, the breath of life, breathe into us and allow us to open. Allow us to permit feelings to rise to the surface and feel the depths of our emotions. Allow us to speak and to hear words that are our humble attempt to honor Arthur Epstein. And when we have no words, allow us to cry, to weep together. In our tears, may Arthur know our loss, our gratitude, our respect, and our love. Arthur, we hold your spirit gently as we hold each other, and especially of your family, not all of whom could be here today. Your wife, Bryna, your children and grandchildren, Julie and JB, Zoe and Charlie, Amy and Adam, Lauren and Mark, Jake and Lauren, Grace, Jonathan and Lynn, Matthias, Noah, Mark, and then obviously your children and grandchildren through Bryna, Mark and Charisse, Eli, Tess and Joe, Delancey and Chris and Lila, Alan and Laura, Bailey, Sam and Jake, David, Hannah, Rachel, and Jason. In the words of Ecclesiastes, a season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing. In another psalm, the psalmist cries out, "I lift my eyes to the hills, from where will my help come? Answering his own question, the psalmist says, "My help will come from Hashem, from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth." In this complicated time of mourning, in the complexity of emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet, in knowing in our head that Arthur is no longer suffering, but feeling in our hearts the pangs of his physical absence, we turn to the ineffable one. We breathe into the mystery that created the heavens and the earth. And as I chant Psalm 121, linking Arthur's life with the 3,000-year-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God, allow your attention to be drawn to the tone and timbre of our ancient language. Allow your mind and your heart settle more deeply into this moment. The Psalm's final line is our prayer for Arthur. May God guard your coming and your going. May the divine spirit that watched over you as you entered into this world now watch over and escort you into the world to come. Shir lemalo, esa el Nile heharim, me'ayin yavo Ezri me'im Adonai, oseh shamayim va'aretz. Hayiten lamot raglecha, ayanum shomrecha. Hine lo yanum v'lo yishan, shomei Yisrael. Adonai shomrecha, Adonai tzilcha, ayad yeminecha. Yomam hashemesh lo yakecha v'yareach b'layla. Adonai yishmorcha mikora yishmor et nafshecha. Adonai yishmor tzetecha uvoecha me'ata ve'ad olam. Now I'd like to call on people to share memories and stories of Arthur, and we begin with his daughter Julie.
Thank you all for coming today. I thought I could get through this, sorry. Thank you all for coming today to honor our dad and support our family as we navigate this difficult loss. If I tried to tell you everything that made my dad special, we'd be here until next Shavuos. And this Shavuos begins tomorrow night, and no one has time for that. My dad could be called many things. He was a self-made businessman, well-respected and admired, a smart investor, an inspiring mentor of and cheerleader for many young entrepreneurs, a devoted friend, a generous philanthropist, and the stories. Having dinner with him at a restaurant near Boston Garden before a Bruins game, and him beaming because people in the restaurant thought I was his girlfriend. Love that. And I'm just getting started. I could be here forever. But if you ask me how I would describe my dad, I would very simply say that he was and always will be my hero, because he stayed with my mom and never abandoned his family in spite of her struggles with mental illness. He often said, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning how to dance in the rain. I suspect we've all seen this saying emblazoned on everything from t-shirts to coasters. But my dad adopted it as a mantra and made it his own. There were storms in his life, beginning with the death of his father and the familial responsibilities he assumed at the young age of 16 as a result. When my mother began to exhibit signs of bipolar disorder early on in their marriage, a lesser man might have walked away. It was hard. He was just getting started in business, had 3 small children under the age of 9, and the storm was raging. My dad did everything he could think of, was capable of, to make sure our family didn't drown in that storm, and that we found ways to dance in the rain. And he did this again and again and again, because that's how bipolar disorder works. His family came first, especially his 3 children, and he was laser focused on making sure we all remained afloat, pulling each of us up as we dipped below the surface at various moments in our childhoods. His desire to support those he cared about expanded to include extended family and those whom he thought of as family. So many of you are here with us today. Beyond family, extended family, and family adjacent, for lack of a better term, my dad also loved to help young people, and sometimes not so young people, who had good ideas. He invested both time and money and rejoiced in their successes. This is partly why the last couple of years of his life were so incredibly difficult for him. The fall, the hip surgery, and the other physical issues with which he grappled caused a self-centeredness which was so out of character with who he was. It was painful to watch my hero, who devoted his life to helping others, not be able to do very much for anyone, especially himself. My dad was the original facilitator of greatness, a moniker I've adopted to describe my volunteer work with theater schools and nonprofit regional theaters for the past 20 or so years. He loved to boast to people that I worked at the Huntington for free, and then proceeded to offer them the complimentary tickets that I got, and came to understand and respect my devotion to the performing arts as a corollary of his own passions. My daughters have taken up the mantle. Zoe as a middle school theater teacher in Natick, who recently shared a story about one of her students with dyslexia for whom she facilitated a major breakthrough in the recent spring play. And Amy, who is about to begin a master's program in leadership and organizational change, which she describes to me as the people side of business, investing in people, like their Zadie. Dad told me often what a great job JB and I have done with our daughters and how proud he was of how they turned out. They're still cooking. Got news for you. That was the ultimate win as far as he was concerned. Thanks, Daddy, for showing me how it's done. I love you.
Thank you, Lauren and Mark.
Okay, get comfortable. This could be a while. No, I'm kidding. Monday, the family got together at Dad and Bryna's apartment with Rabbi Michael, sharing reminiscences about my dad, and it became evident that it was going to be impossible to sum up 86 years in just one meeting. Sorry we kept you so long. So many of you have reached out to us, each of us kids, and grandchildren, actually, to express sincere condolences. And over I've heard the same words. Your father was larger than life, which I suppose was really easy to say when somebody's 6'2" and a massive man. But also, this larger piece is, I think, in response to his huge voice, his powerful handshake, his enormously warm smile, his willingness to help a family member, a friend, a stranger, an animal, and an institution, and there are so many stories. But I just want to take this opportunity to share a couple of my own memories. As the middle kid, the one without a J name, this is the stuff you won't read in the paper. So growing up, my dad had season tickets to the Red Sox, and he used to love to take me there, and I loved being in Boston with my dad, and we would hold hands and walk to Fenway Park, and we would eat our way to Fenway Park, all the crap that the vendors are selling, and the sausages, and the whatever they sold, we ate it. And it was like our secret meeting. We didn't have to tell Mom what we were eating. We just went forth and stuffed ourselves. And he knew he had a partner in crime in me, because I was always down for keeping a secret, and I was always down for eating with abandon. I was remembering that at one of the games that I went to with Dad, a ball came directly at us. It was a foul ball from Karl Yastrzemski, and it landed right in front of us, and then it rolled 2 rows in front. And my dad, that enormous man, dove underneath these seats. I thought he would get stuck, and he grabbed that ball so I could have that ball. Don't ask, the ball is long gone, but it was a moment. We went to hockey games together, too, for much the same purpose, the gourmet food at the Bruins game. We really loved it. Okay. Something you may not know about my father, he hated being alone. He couldn't bear it. Even as a young child, my grandmother told me the story that when he would get dropped off from the bus from elementary school, young Arthur would be at the top of Lillian Road and start screaming from the bus corner, Mom, 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 I'm coming home, Mom, Mom, until she would step out and greet him and say hello and let him know that she knew he was on the way. And I think part of that was because he didn't want to be alone, and part of that was because the young entrepreneur, Arthur, was starving because he had usually sold his lunch. This is true. So he hated being alone. Even at Newbridge, he had round-the-clock people with him. Even at the funeral home, we made sure he had round-the-clock people with him. He grew up in Malden, many of you know. His Malden friends were his lifelong best friends. They built and sold businesses together, celebrated mitzvahs together, took vacations, and offered each other comfort during painful times. Dad would call these guys just to check in, just to hear their voices. It could be a 11-second phone call. It didn't matter. He was a very loyal, devoted friend. And he really needed to be connected with other people. His phone was really his lifeline. Before cell phones, he would spend hours on the phone every night at home, sitting at the kitchen table with pads of paper, and he'd call each manager of every Midas shop every night, and he'd say, and John, you'll laugh, and he'd say, how'd you end up? what'd you end up with? He wanted the numbers, give me the numbers. But underneath that, he wanted to know, how's everybody that's working in the shop? Is anybody in trouble? Does anybody need anything? And he would find out. I mean, there were middle of the night trips to jail to get people out. Like, there was a lot of stuff going on. There were a lot of people involved. But each person mattered to him. And his genuine concern was instinctive. It wasn't something that anybody had to teach him. And once cell phones were in existence, forget it. He was on the phone constantly. My mother used to ask him, please start making some of your phone calls in the car, because she never talked to him. It was like his cell phone was for him like breathing. It was his way of connecting with people he loved, his way of doing deals. He'd call people to cajole them to his point of view. He'd offer advice, solicited or not. Yeah, he just wanted to be connected to everybody. And in recent months, his arthritis became so uncomfortable in his hands, it was hard for him to hold the phone or make these phone calls. So it was just a beautiful act of compassion. My sister would go see him and pick up his phone and see who called and call everybody back. And if Dad could participate in the return phone call, then he did. And if not. But she made sure that everybody got a call back, which I thought was just tremendous. So another thing that we used to joke about was how Dad reminded us of Fred Flintstone in that he was super regular. He didn't have to be regular. He was very successful in business, but it never changed him. He was profoundly unpretentious. He would wear his Land's End pants with frayed hems. He shopped at Marshall's for all the bargains. One year he came to my house to watch the Wimbledon finals together, and he and I had a shared love of tennis. He arrived early, which was standard operating procedure, if you know my dad. So we went for a walk in the neighborhood, and we lived on a big hill, so it was a workout because nothing was flat. It was steep. And am I getting the hook? I told you it might be a while. So anyway, when we got back to the house, he was drenched in sweat, and I said, "Look, give me your clothes. I want to throw them in the washing machine. They're gross." And so he wrapped himself in a towel and waiting for the clothes. And meanwhile, the match was about to start, and my dear friend Robin came over to watch with us. And Robin's father was an old friend from Malden, also of my dad's. And so there were the three of us were watching the finals, me and Robin and Dad in his towel. Like super Fred Flintstone. Getting back to his love of a bargain or bargain, when my husband was in the hospital for an extended period early in our marriage, Dad came in for a visit with a bag full of ties and delight from Filene's basement. He was so excited to give these to Mark because Mark always wore a suit to work. And, I mean, you need ties, right? So he's like, "Mark, guess what I paid for these ties?" It's like, "I don't know, Arthur." He's like, "They were $3 a piece." And Mark looks in the back like, "Yep." Sure. But he was so proud, and he just wanted to shower Mark with love, and that was how he showed his love. He led by example. He was, like Julie said, he was extremely unselfish. This is a really important thing that I learned from my dad. Be generous in whatever you do. It doesn't need to be financial, whether you volunteer in an organization or simply say hello to someone stocking supermarket shelves. Just be generous, be a mensch. Tikkun olam, do what you can. But if you had financial resources and he knew it, he would find you and shake you upside down to lighten your pockets a bit. He really wanted people to understand the joy that he experienced by giving. And I think that was a lesson that he offered a lot of people. And finally, I want to say that the other thing he demonstrated to me was the importance of family and dear friends and holding your loved ones close. He adored his family. He adored his mother, his siblings, not one, but 2 wives that he really adored, and his children, and most significantly, his grandchildren. His 3 kings and 3 queens. He used to say that all the time. And he would do anything for them, and he tried to do anything for them. And I just miss this gentle, generous, fun-loving, thoughtful, kind, sensitive man. Thank you.
Thank you, Lord. Jonathan?
That was a lot of people. I'm going to try to not be brief. Thank you all for coming. The deluge of texts and emails and calls really helped during the last couple days. Before I begin my eulogy, I wanted to share with you a poem that I read to my father several years ago. This prose struck a deep chord within my father's being and literally changed the course of our relationship. It goes like this. Look to this day, for it is life, the very life of life. In its brief course lie all the verities and realities of our existence, the bliss of growth, the glory of action, the splendor of achievement are but experiences of time. For yesterday is but a dream, and tomorrow is only a vision. And today, well lived, makes yesterday a dream of happiness, and even every tomorrow a vision of hope. Look well, therefore, to this day. He loved that. Okay. As I look out into the eyes of the numerous family members and friends who are here today, I'm reminded that there is an incredible price one will surely have to pay one day for having a father as great as mine. It is true that I was given a front row seat to the magic that was Arthur. I watched him change the lives of countless people with his acts of kindness, although the vast majority of his maneuvers were really hidden in plain sight. Dad didn't need to be recognized for what he did. It was really in his DNA. He just couldn't help himself. He also experienced tremendous joy in being able to support numerous philanthropic causes that lifted others up, which then fed his own spirit and soul. Dad could relate to people from all walks of life, and if there's any guys from Midas in here, they know exactly what I'm talking about. He was a very empathetic man. He valued character over pedigree, and he was not a cynic. He always looked for the good in every person, and he usually found it. But now, as I look back on all he accomplished in his life, I'm faced with this monsoon of tears. I'm told there's a kind of sacredness in tears. They are not the mark of weakness, but of power. They speak more eloquently than 10,000 tongues. They are the messengers of overwhelming grief, of deep contrition, and of unspeakable love. Today, the streets of the North Shore, in my mind, are flooded with tears. As we mourn the passing of my father, Arthur Joseph Epstein. During the 18 plus or minus months he spent in Newbridge, I visited my father as often as I possibly could. He would complain about the quality of food, so I would bring him sandwiches from the local food restaurant, as well as cookies from local bakeries, which he enjoyed from time to time. He would complain about the rehabilitation exercises he was given to do outside of his scheduled physical therapy and occupational therapy sessions. He had a very hard time adjusting to his new life as a patient, and the pain of his broken hip and his limited mobility were both quite overwhelming for him. During this time, I tried to be his biggest supporter and would stroll with him in the hallways, accompanied by his walker for support. He would be using a walker. He was having an incredibly difficult time, and he was very downtrodden. He talked to me about his feelings of hopelessness, but I tried to give him hope and reasons to carry on with his exercises. It was also during this time that he and I began to find our way back to one another in a new manner, using a new language, which truly brought us closer together. For the first time in my life, he really opened up to me about him, what made him tick. During his time at Newbridge, Dad and I began to have very intense conversations about his life, his business dealings, his children, his friends, and most importantly, his grandchildren. Dad began to share his greatest fears, as well as his numerous regrets he had as he reflected upon the arc of his life. He shared countless stories about his youth growing up in Malden, how the death of his father at such a young age impacted him, and also what it was like for him taking care of his mother, or my mother, who suffered most of her life with bipolar disorder. His most colorful and detailed stories often involved his numerous business dealings, and he always ended up with a great story about building the Midas Muffler empire. As his health steadily declined, my visits became more frequent. From January to May of this year, I would try to visit 3 to 4 times a week for varying lengths, depending on his energy level and lucidity. One such visit that stands out for me occurred just in April. It was a spectacular spring day with temperatures in the 60s and sunny skies. The flowers were beginning to bloom. My oldest son, Matthias, was home for a brief visit. My wife's son and I spent the afternoon outside with Dad. This visit will forever be a lasting memory of joy for the three of us. We sat outside in the warmth of the sun, where Dad shared several memorable stories from his life. He was so incredibly lucid. He made numerous jokes and recalled stories so far back in the past that I had actually forgotten them. That hour in the sun was unbelievable. His smile was bright. His humor returned. And his memories of his accomplishments, his friends, my 2 sisters, and of course, all of his grandchildren flowed freely. I honestly believe this was a visit that God assisted with. Shortly after this visit, his health began to deteriorate even more rapidly. He also began to exhibit even more significant signs of dementia, which made our discussions incredibly hard and less frequent. But I was often able to coerce him into brief moments of lucidity by going back to Midas Muffler. It always would bring him back, and he would lock in. He loved to talk about the glory days of Midas. It was unbelievable. Just this past weekend, I experienced both incredible joy and unbearable sorrow, all within 24 hours. My family traveled to Washington, D.C. to attend the graduation ceremony for my oldest son, Matthias. I'm very comforted to have attended the graduation of my son, his grandson. It was truly one of the most memorable moments I've experienced as a parent. Losing my father less than a day after my son received a Georgetown diploma almost seems like a poetic transition of his soul and his presence to a new lifetime of possibilities. I think it was his way of saying, I'll always be with you. Dad, your passing has left a massive chasm in the hearts and minds of so many friends and family members. Your philanthropy knew no bounds. You changed the lives of so many people. These past 3 days, I've been inundated with phone calls and text messages from across the globe. Most of the communications brought me tremendous comfort as people expressed their sorrow and shared stories from the past regarding the impact you had on their own lives or on the lives of their children. Dad had done a lot of things behind the scenes. Dad had secretly paid off mortgages. He had helped refinance business loans. He'd even found proper medical care for past employees and their loved ones. I would have never known these stories if I hadn't got them via text. The stories of his kindness were so numerous and beautiful, I literally would break down in tears at the end of the day to go through them all and reply. These stories gave me the comfort I needed so I could start to process his passing. In closing, rest easy, Dad. You blazed your own path in the North Shore, which will forever be remembered. Your generosity was limitless. Your beautiful heart impacted the lives of so many people, it is mind-boggling. Although you are physically no longer with us, your legacy of generosity and compassion for others will continue to inspire all of us to carry out your magnificent legacy. Dad, you were the ocean of safety that created infinite possibilities of fearless expression in others. Thank you.
Mark. Thanks. The first thing I learned about Arthur, besides how big he was what a good sense of humor he had. He never took himself too seriously. He loved to tease people, and he didn't mind being teased back. When people asked him what he did for a living, he would often say, "I'm an MD, a muffler dealer." From the very first time he met my mother, he would always refer to me as, "What's his name?" which would make my mother crazy. She once asked me in frustration, "Why does he call you that?" I had to explain to her, "He's just screwing with you, Mom." One time, Lauren and I were visiting Arthur and Eunice at their place in Florida, and we went to the beach, and I went for a swim in the ocean, and by mistake, I left my money clip in my swimsuit pocket where it got soaking wet. When we returned to the apartment, Arthur helped me line up and flatten out all my waterlogged $20 bills on the kitchen counter to help them dry out. I took a shower. I came back a little while later to find out that all my waterlogged 20s were miraculously bone dry. Except when I looked closer, my eyes bugged out because all of my $20 bills had been replaced by a whole row of crisp, dry $1 bills. Arthur saw the expression on my face, and he burst out laughing as he tried to explain to me how wet 20s can shrink up like crazy when they dry out. As you all heard, Arthur was a gifted entrepreneur, and he was an astute investor. And I had the privilege of observing him in action and learning from him for almost 35 years. I used to tease Arthur that he never met a deal he didn't like. He was truly a Mississippi riverboat gambler with a very high tolerance for risk. And having Arthur as your partner was like walking around with a winning Powerball ticket in your pocket. Arthur was a great partner to have because he understood that investing is a probabilistic business and not every deal is a winner. And I never heard him complain about losing money unless he felt that the sponsors had been dishonest or treated the investors unfairly, which was pretty rare for Arthur because he was a really good judge of character. Most of us are well advised to avoid investing in things we don't understand, but that never stopped Arthur. He believed that you invest in people, and he looked for people who were lucky, smart, and honest. and who had good character. The more exotic and cutting edge the technology, the better, as long as he had confidence in you. And Arthur had big shoulders. If he was your partner and you ran into trouble, he was the first person to call to see what he could do to help. Arthur was not a detail guy. He was not an eye dotter or a T-crosser. And toward the end of his life, he enjoyed entertaining me by enumerating all the deals he was in, many of which I had never heard of before. And I would always ask him, so who else knows about this deal? Or, so who has the paperwork on this? And sometimes he would just shrug his shoulders and smile, and sometimes he would get impatient with me and he'd say, that's why I'm telling you about it. As you've heard from Lauren and Julie and John, Arthur loved people and he hated being alone and he was constantly on the phone. And in the early days of cell phones, his monthly bills were bigger than the gross national product of Ecuador. He was a great motivator of people. His lifelong friend and partner in the real estate business, Neil Cooper of blessed memory, once explained to me that Arthur would spend a day in one of his stores and the sales would skyrocket for weeks and months afterwards. Arthur was a force of nature. He was an incredible father-in-law. He was warm and kind. And thoughtful and generous. And he'd be really annoyed with me now. And thoughtful and generous with his money, with his time, and with his advice. So I'll just close with Arthur's standard voicemail message to me, which I've heard 1,000 times and which I'll never get tired of and I'll always remember because it usually meant that when I called him back, I was going to learn something really fun or funny or interesting or some top secret piece of business information that nobody but me and Arthur and 100 of his closest friends knew about. Or I'd be asked to go on some mission impossible for him. And so it goes like this. Mark, it's Arthur. Nothing urgent. Give me a call when you have a minute. Click.
Thank you, Mark. Steve Rosenthal?
Okay, that's not fair. You guys were phenomenal. Julie, Lauren, Jonathan, Mark, amazing, amazing. You summed it up, you captured them. It was perfect, perfect. As you heard, Arthur lived a truly incredible, truly remarkable, truly impactful, truly wonderful life. It was a life well lived. It was lived to the fullest, and then some, as you've heard. I always told Arthur that I wanted to be him when I grew up. I think that annoyed him too, because I don't think he understood it, because I said it a lot. People often ask me what my relationship was to Arthur. It's always a tough thing to answer, and to answer succinctly. It was complicated, just like Arthur. I was one part protector, I was one part consigliere, and one part rabbi. Well, maybe assistant rabbi, the rabbi is here. But maybe I was really one part, or many parts, groupie, or acolyte, wannabe. Torah teaches us that we are all created in the image of God. You've heard that before. But Arthur was the perfect example of that. There was God, and there was Arthur, the mirror image. Sure, on occasion he could be tough, demanding, have high expectations. I know you kids never experienced any of that. strong opinions. But in reality, he was warm, he was kind, engaging. He had an amazing way of talking to people. Didn't matter if you were a US senator or you worked on the shop floor. He had an amazing way of touching people, and not just in business, but in everyday life. Every one of you said he was larger than life. And that's not just in stature. He was a force of nature, one of a kind, one of a kind. I know that's a cliche, but he was one of a kind. I often thought that he was this rare combination of Zeus, on the one hand, all-powerful, all-knowing, and then on the other hand, one part Moses, the inspirational Jewish leader to be listened to be emulated, and followed into battle to the ends of the earth. He had this visceral intensity about him that was very powerful, very magnetic. Arthur will forever be remembered as one of the most consequential leaders in our community on so very many levels. Everyone here, everyone he touched, is the direct beneficiary, not just of his generosity and his philanthropy, but also of his community-focused leadership and thoughtfulness. My quotes aren't as good as the ones that Jonathan had, but Aristotle is credited with saying that to give away money is an easy matter and in any person's power. But to decide to whom to give it and how large and when and for what purpose and how is not in every person's power nor an easy matter. I'm not going to stand here and tell you that Arthur channeled Aristotle, but he didn't just give away money. There was a method and a purpose to it. His work in mental health, honoring Eunice, was transformational. At a time when people didn't talk about it, he helped not only to remove the stigma, but to improve care in a substantive and tangible way. His life's work in the Jewish community, building Hillel, supporting Jewish education in this community, was and is and will remain transformational. There are dozens and dozens of examples of his purpose-based philanthropy in our community, where his relentless drive and relentless energy transformed the way money is raised and put to use. Arthur didn't rule by committee. He wanted to get things done. It was pretty much, as Mark said, let's get it done. If we need to talk about it, we could talk about it later, after we do it. He definitely did not rule by committee. This building is a perfect example. There are many examples. Arthur says we need a new parking lot at the temple. Guess what? We get a new parking lot. Arthur says we need a new kitchen at the temple. Guess what? We get a new kitchen. It was always that way. It was the same for every philanthropic endeavor he was involved in. Results mattered, and the force of his will made it happen. Arthur never, ever forgot where he came from. The map says Malden is 5 square miles. 5 square miles? 50 square miles wouldn't hold Arthur's personality. To think that what Malden produced, the Malden water, the Malden soil, the likes of Arthur and his dear business partners, Neil, Barry, and of course his beloved Mort, and their amazing spouses, and certainly Ira and Judy, all of whom, both with Arthur and in their own way, worked tirelessly to make our community a better place and make it what it is today. The loss of Arthur and that entire Malden generation is truly profound, and it's incumbent on all of us not just to preserve and maintain his legacy, but to build upon it, to grow it, and to make it thrive. Bryna, Julie and JB, Lauren and Mark, Jonathan and Lynn, Jake, Grace, Zoe, Amy, Mateus, and Noah. Each and every one of us here are a part of Arthur's legacy. Remember, one part Zeus and one part inspirational Moses. And his spirit and good work will live on through us, always and forever, which the rabbi tells me is a really, really long time. Arthur is and will be a part of us every day, who we are now and a part of everything we do from here on. He's left it to us to continue his work, and I know you and everyone here will join me in just doing that. Baruch Dayan Emet. We love you, Arthur. We always will.
David? I made a mistake. I was supposed to call up Howard first. You're on deck, and Howard, Rich, and Jake, you're batting in the hole.
I don't know where to begin. These speeches have been so awesome. I'm going to miss my dear friend. When you have a really good friend to share things with, your life experiences are infinitely multiplied. Arthur was my really good friend. I first met Arthur in 1981 on a United Jewish Appeal mission to Israel. Neither of us had been to Israel, but we had been recruited to go on a national mission by leaders in our community. Arthur had been recruited by Neil Cooper, his boyhood friend, and I had been recruited by Bob Lappin, who was my family's landlord in Salem. Arthur was already known as a serious philanthropist, and I was considered to have serious potential because of my family's growing retail business. Neither one of us was truly prepared for the life-altering experience of an Israeli mission. We became friends, and the rest is history. As our friendship grew, we became walking buddies. Arthur lived on the harbor side of Marblehead Neck, and I lived on the ocean side. He would knock on my door at 7 a.m., regardless of the weather, and then we would walk the neck. Afterwards, we would drink coffee, usually at my house, where we would discuss the community, the economy, real estate, politics, and whatever else. We never had a bitter confrontation about politics or anything else, even though we were on different sides on important issues sometimes. We really respected each other. Our shared goal, ultimately, was the advancement of the Jewish community here and in Israel. Our walks marked a special time in our lives, and when he moved to Brookline, it was a personal loss for both of us. We had a lot of fun. Sharon and I visited Arthur and Bryna in Boca West whenever we visited Florida. We traveled with Arthur and Bryna far and wide. on a Baltic cruise to St. Petersburg, on an Alaskan cruise, and then to Spain. All of us had a great time together on these trips, which became lasting memories. Sharon, Bryna, and Arthur and I became fast friends through these trips. Arthur was a consummate gentleman. His life had genuine meaning. He loved his family and would do anything for them. In summation, Arthur was right. I looked. There was not a Brinks truck following the hearse. He used that joke many times. I heard him.
Thank you, Howard. David?
Good afternoon, everyone. And thank you to the Epstein family for allowing me to speak. I'm so sorry for your loss. Arthur was my friend, confidant, neighbor, sounding board, mentor, and adopted uncle. After my father died, he assumed that role as well. I hope that by speaking about him, many of you may come to know him better, and after reflection, perform acts of goodness and kindness in honor of his memory. If Arthur were in attendance today, the first thing he would do is ask how each and every one of you is doing. He would listen attentively to your answer, and he would really care. In fact, I'm sure if he could, he would say to everyone, I know that by being here today in my funeral, it probably brings to mind memories of past funerals that you attended and thoughts of loved ones that have passed on. I'm sorry for your loss, and may their memory be a blessing. The reason that I know Arthur would say that is that after his immediate family, whom he spoke about incessantly and knew everything that was going on all the time, the most important thing to him was his community. He was a man committed to Jewish continuity, education and ideals, mental health, as well as the community at large. His generosity is and will always be legendary. If he saw a need, he handled it. I'd like to share 3 small anecdotes about Arthur that reflect upon his life philosophy. First, I vividly recall a get-together at Crest Development in Wakefield. Arthur, Mort Ruderman of blessed memory, and I were talking about business, and the conversation turned to one of success and what was the real meaning of success. Arthur said something akin to, David, the accumulation of wealth for its own sake is wrong. It's obscene. It's what you can do with the money that's important. It feels good to do good. Remember that. He used to tell me that all the time. It feels good to do good. Second, Arthur loved to help young entrepreneurs, provide them with financing, advice, and help them network so they could become successful. I'm certainly a grateful recipient of the Arthur Epstein Entrepreneurial Program. He absolutely loved to connect people that he cared about. Of course, he may have had an ulterior motive. He did create his own pool of donors that he could call upon to support the latest important philanthropic endeavor. Needless to say, we were all very happy to participate. In fact, on one of my more recent visits to Dedham, Arthur told me that he wished I had gotten to know his friend Cliff Rucker better. Said that was one of the regrets that he had for me. He really thought a lot of Cliff and believed that we would both benefit from each other's friendship. Cliff, you can expect my call in the next week or so. Last, the final times that I visited Arthur, he was waxing in and out of lucidity. He was most concerned about the future of the school and the temple on his hospice deathbed. That's what he was thinking about. I offer my heartfelt condolences to the Nadal, Rubin, and Epstein clan, Bryna, and everyone else who loved and respected Arthur. Every phone call or visit I had with Arthur ended with, "I love you." Arthur, I will miss you. The world, certainly the North Shore, will be a poor place without you. Let's all commit to performing acts of kindness, love, and charity in his memory to ensure that his legacy lives on. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Jake?
So I was the only one of the three kings and queens who said that they might be able to get through a speech without crying, but I may have been lying, so please excuse me in advance. So I always looked up to my Zadie, not only because of his towering presence, as everyone's talked about today, but for the kindness and the unwavering support he showered upon us and everyone around him. To me and my 5 cousins, he was our rock, our protector, and our guiding light. One of the things that a lot of folks have spoken about today, I think the fact that we're all hitting on this point really makes it ring even more true, was the relationships that he had with people. He took more pride in the success of the people he invested in than the returns that he earned from their businesses. In one of my favorite stories, he took his Hyundai Genesis into one of the Midas shops for maintenance. And the guys in the shop loved him, and they teased him about the Hyundai and about getting something fancier, and that just wasn't his way. Also, it's a lot harder to get a case of 50 one-liter bottles of seltzer in the trunk of an exotic car after a Costco run, so sure that had something to do with it. Anyway, when he came back for the car, the guys had replaced the Hyundai hood ornament with a Bentley hood ornament. I actually don't think he even noticed at first. I don't think he even really recognized it. But he got such a kick out of that. And it spoke volumes, not just about who he was, but also about what other people thought of him. You know, he was a Bentley of a man, but he'd rather give to others than spend it on himself. By any measure, my grandfather was a giant among men. And my greatest aspiration is to become even half the person he was. His legacy lives on in all of us, in the hearts of those he influenced, guided, and loved. Thank you.
To Arthur's children and grandchildren, to his children and grandchildren through Bryna, thank you so much for sharing your father and your grandfather with all of us. Thank you for your words this morning, and perhaps more for your tears this morning. Arthur's Hebrew name was Avraham Yosef. Avraham, the name given to the ancestor of the Jewish people, means father of a multitude of nations. It's no wonder, as David hinted, that so many of us feel that Arthur was our father too. He protected, he provided, he cared for, he advised, and he lovingly chastised so many of us. Joseph, who lived a life guided by the hand of God, who transcended extraordinary challenges within his own immediate family, With his namesake Joseph, Arthur shared an audacious strength from deep inside, unwavering optimism, and an unending concern for his brethren. It's only fitting that Arthur opened Midas dealerships. What's better for the man with the Midas touch than to own the store? And it paid off in his investments for profit, and his investments in philanthropy. Just a couple specific things that I really want to point out. God was at work bringing Amy Gold to this community in 2015. You heard David say that the thing that was heaviest on his heart towards the end was the school. To find such meaning and purpose in that last chapter of life, to find a visionary educational leader in whom he could invest. They tell you to buy low and sell high. It's really risky to do that with a nonprofit. But with Amy's leadership and Arthur's investment, over the course of his extraordinary gift, enrollment at Epstein Hillel School doubled. And it's a true testament to what everybody has said earlier, that Arthur invested in people. And Amy, you gave Arthur someone to invest in. He was prescient. He had the personal experience and knew the hardships of mental health. He was personally there for me when my family has had its own issues, and he could speak to me, as Steve hinted, like my rabbi. And so we know that in this personal experience motivated him to provide the founding gift for the Epstein Center for Behavioral Health at Salem Hospital. But none of us could have known that coming out of this COVID crisis, we would enter such a deep and difficult mental health crisis, and that each and every bed at that hospital is saving someone's life. Renee Sidman, past president of Shirat Hayam and also someone who works at Salem Hospital, texted me and said, a friend's son struggled a few years back with suicidal thoughts. He went to the Epstein Center at Salem Hospital. If Arthur hadn't made that happen, my son wouldn't be alive. I think there's a lot of people in this room who could tell the story, how they were personally helped, saved, and touched by Arthur. How his generosity and the fullness of his heart was just unending. It was infinite. That's how love is supposed to be. You don't need to hold it just for one person. The more you give that love, the more you're filled with love. We've heard from Arthur's children. We heard from his grandchildren. A couple other stories that I liked, that his grandchildren, when he made grilled cheese sandwiches for the grandchildren, he taught them you have 2 parts butter and 1 part cheese, and that's how you make the proper grilled cheese. That there's no better way to babysit than to take your grandkids to Costco. But let me say a few words about the light that reconnected with Arthur in the early 2000s. Bryna and Arthur met when they had apartments across from each other, both newly married, both with infants. They had these apartments in Malden. I think you bought your first homes together in Peabody. And then went your separate ways, but stayed a little bit in touch. But the connection declined as the years went by. And in the early 2000s, when Bryna came back to town for a class reunion, and this is a little, I think, dangerous. When you're from Chelsea and somebody's from Malden, I'm not sure that it always mixes here. But Bryna was at a class reunion in Chelsea and bumped into Arthur's brother-in-law and sister, told them she was back in town, and Arthur called the next day. And I can only imagine, had I been here in those early 2000s, what it would have been like to know Arthur, to perhaps have been that one or two people in whom he could truly confide. And our minds only can imagine, as it was hinted at by his children, the challenges of raising 3 children, of dearly caring for his beloved wife, Eunice, as she struggled throughout her life with bipolar disorder, of being endlessly driven to succeed in business so that you could help other people, give people meaningful employment, and what a toll that would have taken on him. And to have this sunshine, the light that you brought him, Bryna, show up for him. To be able to give his children the confidence that their father's spirit would be revived, his energy restored, that he would be able to continue to smile and enjoy, would have been is such a gift to Arthur's children, Bryna. It's funny to ask Arthur and Bryna to describe their relationship. They would share words very simple, very understated. Arthur, why did you fall in love with Bryna? I knew she was a nice lady. She was pretty. Bryna, we both love bargains. It was quite easy, very comfortable. I know that the backbone, Bryna, of your relationship was caring for each other, caring for family, and caring for the community through tzedakah. Before there was Nike, there was God, Torah, and Moses, and the concept of a mitzvah. Nike took the slogan, just do it, but that's the basic idea of a mitzvah. It's not about if you feel like doing it, just do it. It doesn't matter if you feel like celebrating Shabbos, just celebrate Shabbos. It doesn't mean if you feel like giving, you have an obligation and a duty to give tzedakah. But for Arthur, I think it came so easily because underneath the obligation, he never had to be motivated by that. As you've heard from everybody, his heart was just so large. My wife, through some of the things that we've experienced as a family, introduced me to the concept of super feelers, that there are just human beings out there whose hearts, minds, and bodies are more attuned to other people. And I think Arthur had this extraordinary capacity to feel and to care for others. That beneath the tzedakah, he was driven by the passion of hesed, of loving kindness, and a deep caring for people. He cared for so many in this community, both in the Jewish community and in the secular world. He cared for people in healthcare. And when you asked him in those final weeks of his life, when his mind was troubled, but his heart was just so honest and open. Arthur, what's on your heart? What concerns you? The school. Epstein Hillel, that concerns him. And then the conversation would go to retirement and health care. Who's going to take care of the people? I try to explain what the synagogue might be doing for the members of the community. He would never take any answer I gave as satisfactory. He would keep pushing because in his heart, he just couldn't imagine how people were going to be able to be taken care of. And then he'd say, but who's going to take care of the people with low income? Look at the help that I have. Look what I have each day, how much it costs. Who's going to take care of the people who don't have what I have? He couldn't stop caring. Who's going to take care of the temple? And it was a strange conversation, and you might think it was inappropriate or awkward, but that's where his heart was. And it was on the surface because his heart was constantly caring about people. So as I think a couple people have said, part of the way that we can hold on to Arthur's legacy is really to hold on to those questions. What do I care about? What does my community need to survive, to thrive? Can I find greater joy and satisfaction in giving than on spending on myself? And how can I play a positive role, a leadership role, in impacting the lives of fellow human beings? As the Jewish sage Ben Sira taught, the good things in life last for a short time, but a good reputation endures forever. Arthur, Avraham Yosef, father to the multitudes, with an audacious inner strength and enduring concern for your brethren. Your absence leaves a void in the lives of your family and the multitudes who considered you a father figure. You will be missed, but never forgotten. Please rise for the memorial prayer. Shochem b'meromi Amsei menucha nechona Tachat kanfei hashechina B'mahalot kedoshim atoharim K'zoa harakia mazhiri Et nishmat Avraham Yosef Ben Chaim Yaakov V'chaya Gisla Shechalach le'olamo began Eden tehe menuchato Ahana Bahal harachamim Astirehu besete kenafecha l'olamim Utzro betzroch ha'chaim et nishmato Adonai hu nachalato V'yanuch b'shalom ha'mishkavo v'nomar Amen. El Malei Rachamim, exalted, compassionate God, grant perfect peace beneath the wings of your presence among the holy and the pure, whose radiance is like the heavens. To the soul of Avraham Yosef ben Chaim Yaakov v'chaya Gisla. May his memory be a blessing and may he rest in paradise. Master of mercy, may he find eternal shelter beneath your sheltering wings. And may his soul be bound up in the bond of life. The Lord is his portion. May he rest in peace. And let us say, Amen. Please be seated. Just a couple of announcements. If you're going to be proceeding to the burial with us at the Shirat Hayam cemetery, please put whatever, I assume put your flashers on to join the processional and join in the lineup. I want to thank the whole community really came together for today's funeral. I want to thank the JCC for helping to set up the chairs, Epstein Hillo for audiovisual work, making it possible for us to host Arthur's funeral today. Can I just have a show of hands? How many of you ever worked for Arthur? And how many of you ever worked for an organization that Arthur supported? And how many of you ever worked with Arthur? So if you come back to the visitation, the gathering at Kernwood after the burial, my encouragement is that you come up to each other, you come up to Arthur's children and grandchildren, and you say, hey, I worked with your father. Could I share a story with you? And the more stories that we can share this afternoon, the stronger Arthur's legacy becomes. Lastly, if you parked in the back parking lot. You can exit through the back doors of the lobby. However, it's not handicapped accessible, and please use caution as the patio is uneven. To conclude our service this morning, I'd like to ask Marcy Yellen to play a song.
To a land that I will show you. Lech lecha, to a place you do not know. Lechi lech, on your journey we will bless you, and you shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. You shall be a blessing. Lechi lach, lechi lach, and we shall make your name great. Lech lecha, and all shall praise your name. Lechi lach, to the place we will show you. L'simchat chayim.